Good morning. Happy Thursday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. The thing that you have to start to recognize is that external rotation and internal rotation are not either ors. They both happen at the same time in different ways. So if you just turned a femur to the extreme of external rotation.
So outward,
Okay?
like that.
I'm talking about one femur and just like the extreme of external rotation. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you fix it there. And then I take a pelvis and I turn it towards that leg. It's still externally rotated. However, the representation, depending on where I pay attention, if I looked at the hip joint, as I turn the pelvis towards that leg, I reduce the external rotation bias and increase the internal rotation bias. So both are there at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Internal rotation gets superimposed on top of external rotation. So when we talk about ERs and IRs, that's why I use the word bias.
Mm-hmm.
Because both are happening at the same time, just to different degrees. The problem with the representation of the internal and external rotation based on dead guy anatomy is that there's been this like 0 point, and then everything on this side has been IR, everything on this side has been ER, and then that creates a horrible representation of what's really going on. Okay, so if we want to get closer to reality, we have to recognize that both are occurring at the same time. Okay, the expansion of external rotation represents the maximum amount of motion that I can create. The internal rotation moves back and forth between the extremes of external rotation. So when I say ER or IR, as we're talking about a squat, we're talking about a bias. So I want to make that very clear. I hope that's understandable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you're at the top of, you're standing up straight, okay, and you're going to initiate the squat, the bias is going to be towards external rotation. Now, external rotation is not a line, it's not an arc, it's not a plane, it's a space. It's a space around you that you can access depending on the shape of your body. Okay. For the sake of representation, I have drawn it on a whiteboard. A whiteboard is two-dimensional, and so it's a flat picture. What I want you to understand is that external rotation is a space around you. So as you descend into the squat, you will be biased towards external rotation. Wherever the space that you can access external rotation is where the leg is going to kind of point when you initiate a squat. Okay. So if I can expand on the back side of my body, so we call it dorsal rostral expansion in the upper back, we call it counter nutation in the pelvis. If I can do those things, then I can usually keep my knees kind of pointed straight ahead because I can access external rotation bias in that position. Okay, so I'm descending through that space of external rotation. That's where I can actually access it. As I descend farther into the squat, I'm going to go through a space where I have to increase the amount of internal rotation bias. So the pelvis actually changes shape to get through that middle range. Okay, so it moves towards what would look like an exhaled position of the pelvis. So the inhaled position of the pelvis is at the top. That's an external rotation bias. As I go through the middle range, I have to capture an an exhale bias, which is internal rotation. So the pelvis changes shape And the femur could maintain its position, but the overall representation of the pelvis and the femur at that point in time is internal rotation. As I descend farther, I have to re-expand, and I have to go back towards my external rotation bias at the bottom of a squat. Okay. Now, how many times you ever seen a perfect squat? Almost never, right? Because most people can't assume the ideal shape to pass through those ranges and capture the full position because they don't have full adaptability. And a lot of that's just based on structure. So now we can go all the way back to what's your bias? Are you a wide ISA guy or a narrow ISA guy? Right? That would bias you towards one end of the spectrum. So if I'm a narrow, I'm really good at the top and the bottom of the squat. If I'm a wide, I'm really good in that middle part of the squat, generally speaking. Okay.
Bill, can I ask a question on that?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I was on a roll, dude. You interrupted my train. No, go ahead. Of course you can.
Is this why if you watch, I watch a lot of powerlifters squat just repetitively over time, and once you see they hit certain areas, they either have like a hip hinge or something goes wonky. Is it
Yeah. They're out of room.
shape?
They're out of room. Right. So here you go. So let's just say that you can't expand posteriorly. Okay. Knowing full well that to initiate the squat and move through an external rotation bias, or to hit the bottom of a squat, which is an external rotation bias, and I can't do that. So I'm initiating the squat more towards my internal rotation bias, right? And so it's going to look, for lack of a better explanation, hingy. It's going to look more like my deadlift than it is my Olympic weightlifter is sitting down at the bottom of his squat, right? Because that, and again, it could be physical structure. It could be the training strategies that you've been using that don't allow a shape change to occur that allows you to access that motion. So again, you can diagnose. I've been doing this a lot lately. I got to stop that. So you can diagnose a squat or what people can and can't do, you know, based on that shape as they move through the squat. So when I see somebody that's got this really, really hingy squat, they've got what would be termed a really strong lordosis as they're trying to squat. That's a pelvis that is compressed on the backside and anteriorly oriented. Very, very useful for producing force, very useful for stopping motion from occurring. So again, let's use Joseph's powerlifter as an example. So as they try to squat, they don't want to squat too deep, right? They want to stop the motion at a very specific point where they just get far enough down towards the ground where they get a pass from the judge. I did it again. Somebody slapped my wrist. Where they pass their lift, right? So they get their white lights so they can say, oh, it was a good squat or it was not a good squat, right? And so then that becomes useful under those circumstances, but it doesn't make it better than something else. It just means that it is a variation. So when you see someone's knees deviate, when they put, one second. When you see someone's knees deviate early in a squat, and people say you're externally rotating, what they're doing is they're moving their knees apart because at that point in time, the shape of their body does not allow them to access external rotation straight ahead because it's out here. External rotation is out there. That's where they find it based on their physical structure or based on the context of the lift or the performance of the movement. That's why external rotation is a space that is around you based on the shape of your body. Neutral spine.
Got it.
That's a bad word. See, everybody freaked out for a second, didn't they? They go, I didn't hear him say it. Did you? Yeah, he said neutral. Yeah. Got to get rid of that one, pal.
Okay.
Spine moves. Through every squat, it moves. Okay. There's no ideal. There's no one. There are many. Okay. You're spanked. That's your first spank. Your first call, and you get spanked on the first call. Wow.
I think that's a good sign.
You know, I have a list of words, right?
I don't know if I recall.
Are
that.
you unfamiliar with that? There's a few people on the call that have been around me long enough. They kind of know where all the bad words are.